Did you know that employees who struggle with substance abuse are more likely to have an on-the-job accident? Through maintaining a drug-free workplace, employers can prevent critical accidents from occurring, reduce the turnover rate, and protect the safety of all employees. Reasonable suspicion drug testing can be used by employees across the US in a variety of industries, and each state and industry may have their own laws for which company policies must be clearly written and communicated. Supervisors should receive training on how to recognize and deal with employees who are showing signs of personal and performance-based concerns that could be directly related to alcohol or other substances. Understanding your organization's policy, recognizing potential problems, and addressing the issue are essential for advancing corrective action. This training will provide you with knowledge on how to recognize signs and problems, voice reasonable suspicion, crisis response, and the documentation process. If you're ready to utilize the tools that empower you as a supervisor, then make the call to test when there is evidence that supports it. By doing so, you may be preventing accidents, health issues and costs, absenteeism, and litigation against your organization. What constitutes reasonable suspicion in the workplace, allowing an employer to order a drug test for an employee? They must have reasonable suspicion that the employee is under the influence of drugs or alcohol through direct observation or observation from another supervisor or manager to confirm their suspicions. Through close observation, you may discover the employee is demonstrating physical signs of substance abuse, behavioral signs, or even psychological signs. All of these may be signs of impairment, and it is the responsibility of the supervisor to observe, document, and act accordingly. State laws about reasonable suspicion drug testing may vary. Let's take a look at an example of a federal law under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. This federal law protects the employer by requiring a driver to submit to an alcohol test when the employer has reasonable suspicion to believe the driver has violated the prohibitions of Subpart B concerning alcohol. To clarify what is meant by Subpart B, prohibitions include alcohol concentration, on-duty use, pre-duty use, use following an accident, controlled substances use, and other key areas pertaining to reasonable suspicion testing. You may be asking, how can I recognize signs and problems with an employee that could be related to alcohol or other drugs? There are several steps an employee can take to recognize potential problems and then implement appropriate protocols to address the issues. Step 1 is to have an overall understanding of the organization's policy and program. Learn the policy and program along with the rationale for implementing them. Be certain these are clearly communicated and understood among all staff members. Step 2 is to be aware of legally sensitive areas. Follow collective bargaining agreements when applicable. Be sure employees' rights are being maintained and that the same policy and procedures are in place for all employees. Provide due process for response to allegations made. Step 3 is to recognize potential problems. Early detection of emerging patterns of behavior or performance, even work attendance, is key. Addressing problems before they escalate helps create a safe, healthy, and productive workplace for all employees. Step 4 is to document any consistent patterns in performance or attendance deficiencies you identified. Also, document behavior as it occurs. This will be helpful when advancing to corrective action. Step 5 is to act. If you must take action, present the employee with documented evidence of performance concerns or deficits. Referring the employee to an appropriate support, such as Employee Assistance Program or EAP, may help with addressing these concerns. Now let's discuss how once you've recognized a potential problem, you can voice reasonable suspicion and prepare for a crisis. By now, you've recognized there may be a potential problem with an employee of yours. How do you voice reasonable suspicion and prepare for a crisis? Let's consider a few things. If you believe the employee is impaired, remove them from performing the duties of their job until you've figured out why they appear to be impaired. Then you need to request a meeting in a comfortably private and appropriate space with the employee. Explain to them what you've observed and give them a chance to respond. You will inform the employee that a reasonable suspicion drug test is required. Reasonable suspicion drug testing in the workplace is important because it mitigates the risks of accidents or serious injury, provides evidence of an adverse action based on substance abuse at work, protects against discrimination complaints because it becomes a standard policy consistently applied to all employees, serves as a deterrent to employees who may otherwise use substances while on the job, and reduces overall costs to the employer caused by workers' compensation claims and workplace accidents. How do you begin the investigation process when you suspect a potential crisis involving an employee and possible drug or alcohol use? Previously, we discussed the steps to take if you recognize there may be a potential problem or crisis on your hands. It's important for supervisors to understand that although not common, they must be prepared in the event a crisis occurs. When investigating a potential event where drugs or alcohol are involved, consider the following questions. Does unusual behavior, illegal activity, or violation of policy seem to be taking place? What specific behavior is visible, and does it involve an employee or a group? What are the dangers of taking or not taking action? Is there a specific policy that applies to the situation? Should you call in expert consultation with human resources, an EAP, or security? Does the situation require reasonable suspicion testing? Investigating a workplace incident enables employees and workers to identify and implement the corrective actions necessary to prevent further incidents. It's important to look beyond the immediate cause of an incident. It's also misleading to assume that carelessness or failure to follow a procedure alone were the cause of an incident. This fails to discover the underlying root of the incident and fails to identify any systemic changes needed to prevent further incidents from occurring. Remember, if you believe a violation has occurred, notify management immediately. Always follow the guidelines of your organization's drug-free workplace policy, which will detail how to handle such events. If you're unsure on this, contact your human resources representative. You've determined through an investigation process that you have an employee who is struggling with a performance problem in which substance use may be a factor. After constructively addressing the problem with the employee and potential guidance from the EAP process or human resources, it's time to refer the employee for appropriate support. A referral is not necessarily punitive, but a step towards helping the employee get back on track. A reasonable suspicion referral is based upon a supervisor's specific, articulable observations based on the appearance, behavior, or speech of the person for whom the referral was made. Let's discuss some of the guidelines for making an appropriate referral. Consider which treatment options are available for the particular situation and choose the type of assistance based on that. Consider a provider under the employee's health insurance plan. Consider referring the employee to an EAP that specializes in substance use treatment resources, transitioning the employee back to work, and monitoring their compliance with return to work. Where applicable, the Department of Transportation may mandate a workplace follow federal testing regulations in which a qualified substance abuse professional may need to conduct assessments to determine when the employee may return to work. Unless your organization has a zero-tolerance policy, you must have a plan to address steps towards disciplinary action and early intervention recommendations. Support of this process is important as it provides consistent enforcement while removing any potential bias. Documentation is an essential tool for identifying patterns of performance issues or attendance deficiencies. This can also be an effective tool for advancing corrective action with an employee. When you observe performance or attendance deficiency, document it as it occurs. This leaves a running record of patterns should you need to refer to them for corrective action or disciplinary action. When documenting, be very specific as to where an employee has failed to meet specific standards or policy. When speaking to an employee, have specific examples or expectations for them that you can discuss together. This will allow you to be more effective and explicit about the behaviours you expect. How do you document effectively? The first step is to make sure you document in writing what you have observed as evidence to support your basis for conducting reasonable drug testing. Next, be certain the documentation includes the date, time, specifics of behaviour observed, your name, a second observer's name if applicable, and the employee's name. Finally, remember to be specific with your observations to provide a clear picture of what you observed. Let's look at an example of how to properly document. The company's supervisor, Tim, walks past an employee named Sandy. Sandy suddenly stumbles into him and looks very confused. She cannot maintain her balance and her eyes are darting back and forth quickly. Tim smells alcohol on Sandy. He goes into his office and calls Sandy's direct supervisor to see if he has noticed any peculiar behaviour lately. Her direct supervisor, John, has noticed that Sandy is coming to work late for the past several weeks. He decides to go find Sandy to bring her in to talk. When he does, he notices that she is at her workstation, daydreaming and staring off into space. John calls her into the office to speak to Sandy, and when he does, she smells heavily of alcohol and can't seem to keep her focus or answer any of his questions. He decides to call Human Resources with documentation of her behaviour. Together, they complete the appropriate documentation and agree to send Sandy for reasonable suspicion drug testing. Sandy becomes upset when she learns of this, and HR explains its company policy and provides her with a copy of all relevant documents. Sandy then consents to the drug testing. Upon proper documentation and reasonable suspicion drug testing, the employer doesn't want the employee back at work until test results are available. If the test cannot be done immediately, transportation should be arranged for the employee. In the event the employee refuses the drug testing, this is treated as a positive test result. In this event, the employee must be relieved of duty and transportation home arranged for them. In summary, you've learned how to maintain a drug-free workplace to help prevent unwanted accidents and injury and to reduce turnover, all while protecting the safety of all employees. The tools provided in this training will assist supervisors in recognizing signs and problems as they occur and how to voice their reasonable suspicion. Understanding how to prepare for a potential crisis or threat is crucial in the workplace so that supervisors can determine any necessary action steps. This training also provided you with the knowledge of the referral process and why referrals work. Guidelines for making an appropriate referral were given. Finally, knowing how to and when to document your observations is critical in the workplace. The benefits of knowing how to voice reasonable suspicion in the workplace helps mitigate risks of accidents or potential litigation through the removal of employees using drugs or alcohol from the work environment. In addition to all the benefits discussed in this training, reasonable suspicion drug testing reduces overhead costs, including productivity losses, increased workers' compensation costs, and workplace accidents. The aim is to provide protection for organizations and employees alike.